Okay, so today we're going to talk about new developments. The term new development refers to a bunch of different things, which we'll talk about. But there are a few things that you really want to keep in mind when you are working with a buyer who is looking at new developments. And there are kind of some differences in negotiating. And I just want to talk about that and kind of just go through the process of purchasing in a new development. So again, what is a new development, right? So it can be applied to a bunch of different property types, but what it really signifies is a property which is coming onto the market for the first time, right? It can be a building, let's say a rental building, a commercial building, something that is converted into a condo or a co-op, or even a single family home. And it can be a number of different property types, right? It can be a ground up construction, a vacant lot, a parking lot is torn down and a new building is built there. I'll use the example and I'll use some examples of things I've sold in recently. I sold at 75 Kenmare, right? And so that is in Nolita. It was a parking lot. They tore down the parking lot. They built a 7-story building there, and they sold the units, right? And that is a ground up construction. That's what we call. So you went from a vacant lot or something else, tore down the building and built a new building. And that is a new development. You can take a commercial building and you can turn it into a condo or a co-op. So 20 Pine, right? 20 Pine was a huge building. It was an office building in the financial district. And in 2006, I think, they turned it into apartments and they sold off those apartments. And the other thing you can do is you can take a rental building and you can turn it into a condo or co-op. And again, I'll use another example I've sold in. The Chatsworth at 344 East 72nd Street was a rental building. Someone bought the building and they decided to turn those rental units into co-op units, right? So instead of condos, they turned into co-ops. There are a number of reasons that they did that, but they were never sold before, and they are now selling those units. That building functions as a condo, so you can rent them out and things like that, but it's a co-op. Again, they really did that to keep the maintenances down, which is a nice thing for buyers and things like that. So all of these are examples of new developments. And again, as the term new kind of connotates, oftentimes we think of it's a ground up building, but it can be a bunch of different types of property. So keep that in mind. The main difference in a new development, right, is that you are dealing with what we would call sponsor sales. And that is different than a resale, right? So let's say, I bought my apartment 10 years ago. I bought it from another seller. I'm selling it again. That's what we would call a resale. And again, it's been sold once. It's being sold another time, hopefully for more money. A sponsor sale, and the term sponsored kind of connotates the developer or the person who owns the unit that has not been sold on the market before, right? So we use those terms interchangeably. The sponsor and the developer, they can be a little bit different, but when we do have something called a sponsor sale, there are different fees that apply to it. So again, these can be brand new units. 75 Kenmare, these are sponsor sales. The Chatsworth, 344 West 72nd Street, those are sponsor sales. Eunice and Stephanie also have sponsor sales in the co-ops that they're representing on Parade Place, right? 2555 Parade Place, a building on East 18th Street as well. And those are co-op sponsor sales, right? So these can either be brand new units or units that were formerly rental units. And again, they can also be units that were formerly rent controlled or rent stabilized tenants, right? Sometimes the sponsor will go in and totally gut renovate the apartments and then sell them. Sometimes they'll sell them as is, right? They don't want to deal with any renovation, so it's something that needs to be kind of picked up or gut renovated, right? There are different ways of doing this. There can be multiple sponsors in a building, right? So let's say there's a rental building. It's owned by Joe and Larry. Joe owns half the units, Larry owns half the units, and they decide they're going to turn into a co-op. So they're actually two sponsors, right? Joe and Larry are both sponsors in this building. The sales of sponsor units, right? These units are treated differently than resales, right?
Ready?
Resales when an individual owner is selling their unit. So again, what are the differences? So the first for both condos and co-ops is that no board approval is needed for a sponsor sale, right? no board approval is needed. So you don't have to do a co-op board package. You don't have to do a condo board package. You don't have to go through the board for the sale, and the board does not have any right to approve the sale. So this can make it easier for those with fickle financing to get into certain buildings like a co-op or a condo, right? The sponsor usually can sell at different terms, right? Maybe the co-op requires 20% down, but the sponsor units only require 10% down, right? And that's something you can always ask the listing agent, what is the down payment requirement for this sponsor, right? Eunice and Stephanie have done sales at almost 5% in this building, or sorry, Eunice and Michelle have done sales in this building at 5%. Whereas if you're purchasing a resale unit, you have to put down 20% and go through board approval. In addition to the fact that there's no board approval needed, there are different closing costs associated with the purchase that the developer usually tries to have the buyer pay, right? And the main ones that are different are A, the sponsor's attorney fees, B, in a lot of these higher end buildings, there's a fee associated with the purchase of the super, if there's a live-in super, his apartment, right? Because that whole building, they have to sell all the units. One unit that they're selling is the sponsor, the manager, managing agent, or the super, or whoever it is, their unit. And so, when you buy in a condo, you're buying a percentage of the building, right? The common units of the building, which can include that super or manager's apartment. And so usually you pay a fee, right? I did a sale at 561 Pacific, and every unit basically had to pay about $30,000 to $40,000 in closing costs for the super's apartment, right? It was like a $2 million unit. Everyone had to chip in based on their share value and stuff like that. And so that's an additional cost. In addition, because this is the first time that these units are hitting the open market, the transfer tax has to be paid. And we'll get into the specifics of the transfer tax a little later. But usually the sponsor will try to have whoever's purchasing it pay those transfer taxes, right? That's a portion of these benefits of buying a sponsor unit, a brand new unit, or a unit that doesn't need board approval. There's a little bit more in terms of closing costs that your buyer might have to pay for, right? The main thing to get out of this meeting today is that everything can be negotiated. And we're going to talk about negotiation a little bit further down the road. But all of these things, which usually the sponsor wants your buyer to pay, the attorney fee, the potential share of the super manager's apartment, and again, that's usually in newer buildings, or the transfer taxes, those can be negotiated, right? So a transfer tax is a tax that's paid upon the transfer of a deed or the transfer of a unit. It is paid to New York State and New York City. And again, it's usually paid by the seller. So in all resales, these transfer taxes are paid by the seller, right? There's 0.4% of the purchase price up to $3 million paid to New York State, or 0.65% if it's over $3 million to New York State. $3 million or over. So once you hit 3 million, you go to 0.65%. To New York City, you pay 1% of the purchase price of any purchase up to $500,000, and 1.425% of the purchase price above $500,000. So again, these in New York City add up: 1.4% for purchases up to $150,000, 1.825 for purchases up to $3 million, and 2.025 for purchases over $3 million. These are things that can be negotiated, right? Because basically, if you're looking at a purchase in a new development, let's say it's $1 million home purchase, right? You're looking at another $18,250 to purchase that unit, right? So when we're negotiating with developers, and with, again, most of these buildings will have an on-site sales gallery or an on-site sales team. Most of the time, the developers want to stay near their asking prices. And the reason for that is that they want to maintain values across the building. Because they have a little less flexibility in pricing than potentially someone who has a resale has, they are more willing, most of the time, to negotiate on closing costs and incentives. And again, if you think about this, right? Let's say there's 10 units in a building, and the sponsor's asking, $1 million per unit. And again, let's just use a very, very simple thing. If they start going into contract for $1 million, $1 million, $1 million, and then someone puts in an offer at $800,000, immediately, because these are similar units, that person has then devalued the price of every other buyer in the building, right? So the people who have gotten a loan for $1 million are actually underwater now, right? So if one unit ends up selling for significantly less, it ends up changing the value of the pricing in the building. And again, can bring down the price per square foot in the building. So the developer tends to want to maintain the price per square foot. The reason for this is that this can hurt the developer's credibility for other future projects, right? If they sell, half the units for $1 million, and then they're like, I need to get out of this and sell the rest for $500,000, it's hurting those 5 buyers who purchased in this hypothetical building that I'm talking about. So we need to know that when we're going in, because oftentimes there's less flexibility off the asking price in new developments, right? Maybe, across the neighborhood, people are taking, 5 to 10% less, but maybe the developer is only taking 1 or 2% off the asking price. And again, the reason that they do that is to maintain the value across the building. Because of that, the most negotiability really comes at 2 points in the whole process. The first is at the beginning, right? Because they want to get apartments into contract. When you have, and I'm talking about a condo here, when you have an offering plan, the offering plan is the documents that put together the building and how the building allocates resources and things like that. That offering plan needs to be deemed effective by the Secretary of State of New York, right? And that happens usually after about 20% of the apartments are in contract, right? And I put sold here, that's incorrect, in contract, right? Then the plan is deemed effective, and then is when you can really start doing everything on the building. Oftentimes, you need to have about half of them in contract or sold to be able to get financing as well. And again, most new developments will have a recommended lender associated with the building. And that lender is basically saying that they can close on units before the 50% is sold because they're tied into the ownership of the building in some respect and things like that. And so again, at the beginning, when not many are in contract, usually they want to start getting things into contract. And so there's a little bit more negotiability. Also at the end, when the project's almost done, right? Maybe, again, this building at 75 Kenmare that I was mentioning before, right now there's about 6 units left, right, out of 34. And so they want to get rid of these because they're paying the common charges, the taxes on these units. They're having to keep staff there and stuff like that. And so there's probably a little bit more negotiability at this point than there was at the beginning, right? Probably, again, not a ton because they don't want to devalue the pricing in the building and the people who've closed so far, but there's probably a little bit more than there was, when they had, let's say, half in contract or something like that. So, again, there are many things in a deal that you can negotiate. And when we're talking about, new developments, and again, it can be a ground up building, it can be a conversion building and stuff like that. There are many things that you can negotiate, right? And so when you're working with a buyer in a new development or someone who's looking primarily at new developments, you need to A, make sure they know that there are additional fees, and B, let them know that you can negotiate these things, right? And just based on the new development sales that I've done over the last, let's say, 2 years, and I've done a number across Manhattan and Brooklyn, there are many things that can be negotiated, right? So number one is the purchase price. And again, one of my buyers was one of the first people to go in contract at 75 Kenmare. We were able to get about $50,000 off the asking price at that point, right? Right now, they're all selling for asking, or they're going into contract at asking. But because we were early in the process, we got that picked up. The seller's attorney fee, right? Again, usually in a new development, the developer wants your buyer to pay their attorney fee, and it can be anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 or so. We got that paid for as well. Transfer taxes, right? Those taxes that we talked about before, which the sponsor wants the buyer to pay for, I've been able to get the sponsor to pay those taxes. The mansion tax in a couple different deals, the 1% mansion tax that's paid by the purchaser, we've gotten the sponsor to pick up on that. The super's unit costs I've gotten picked up. I've gotten free storage units, right? I've gotten half off a parking unit. We've gotten some credits towards closing costs, right? For one of the developments in Brooklyn, we got a $20,000 credit towards my buyer's closing cost. And in a lot of buildings, right? And some of them are actually advertising this right now. They are paying for common charges and real estate taxes for 1, 2, up to 3 years I've seen out there, right? And so when you add up some of these incentives, even if you're paying the full purchase price, your buyer might be saving, right? Like Let's say $4,000 for the attorney fee. Let's say 1.825% for the transfer tax, 1% for the mansion tax, which goes up purchases over 2 million. The storage units, most of these are between $30,000 and $70,000. Parking, we actually got, it was $200,000 we got off a parking spot for one of the new development deals that I negotiated. One got every closing cost paid for, so they paid for nothing out of pocket. One got 3 months. And again, you can't expect that they're going to give you all of these things. But just remember, when you're putting in an offer, these are things that can be a part of the offer, right? So let's say the asking price is 1 million. You might say, hey, I'm offering $950,000, and we would like the sponsor to pick up X, Y, and Z, right? Their attorney fee, the transfer tax, and the mansion taxes. And again, that adds up to about 4%. So if you add up the change in price plus that, you're getting somewhere around 15, or no, that's not that high, like 9% off the asking price, right? Which in this market is actually not bad, right? 9% is a pretty reasonable savings. And maybe you get a storage unit too. That's another percentage of the purchase price. So just remember, you can negotiate all these things, and when you put in your initial offer, these should all be included in your offer. The really nice thing about these sponsor units and these new development sales is that the process is much simpler, right? You negotiate an offer and you come to terms, you sign the contract, and then you schedule the closing, right? No board approval, nothing in there with the boards. They don't touch the deal at all. They don't have to approve anything because the sponsor is the one who has to approve everything, right? So the process is much simpler. It can close quicker, and it can close in an easier time frame maybe for your buyers and things like that. And they can get a great deal on a brand new construction, right? That's it, right? It's a pretty simple process with new developments. And again, I'm going to stop the share, and I'd love to take any questions or feedback that you guys have. Let me just stop the recording.